The morning sun cast long shadows through the lace curtains of the finest house in Dusty Hollow, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny spirits in the air. Clara Wells stood before the full-length mirror her father had ordered from San Francisco, staring at the ivory wedding dress that hung from the wardrobe like a beautiful ghost. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Edward Langston. The thought sat heavy in her chest, like a stone she'd swallowed whole. She reached out to touch the delicate fabric, imported silk that had cost more than most folks in town saw in a year. Her fingers trembled as they traced the intricate beadwork along the bodice, each tiny pearl sewn with precision by the seamstress who'd come all the way from Denver. "Clara, dear, you must try it on one more time," her mother called from the doorway. Margaret Wells swept into the room, her own silk dress rustling with importance. As the mayor's wife, she carried herself with the bearing of royalty in their small frontier town. "Mrs. Henderson will be here within the hour for the final adjustments." "Yes, Mama," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She began unbuttoning her day dress, her movements mechanical, practiced. How many times had she dressed and undressed these past weeks, preparing for a day she'd never truly wanted? Her mother helped her step into the wedding gown, pulling the stays tight until Clara could barely breathe. Perhaps that was fitting. She'd felt like she'd been suffocating ever since her father announced the engagement 6 months ago. "Stand straight, Clara. A bride must have proper posture." Her mother's hands were gentle but firm as she adjusted the dress. "You'll be the most beautiful bride Dusty Hollow has ever seen. The Langstons are beside themselves with pride. Deputy Mayor Langston told your father just yesterday that Edward hasn't stopped smiling since you accepted his proposal." Accepted? Clara almost laughed at the word. There had been no accepting, only acquiescing. When the mayor's daughter was courted by the deputy mayor's son, there was only one acceptable answer. The alliance would strengthen both families' positions, ensure their continued prosperity in a town where political connections meant the difference between comfort and struggle. "Edward is a good man," Clara said, repeating the words she'd heard so often they'd become a kind of prayer. "He'll provide well for me." "Indeed he will." Margaret stepped back to admire her handiwork. "His prospects with the railroad company are excellent. Your father believes he'll be running the Western Division within 5 years. You'll have a fine house, perhaps even finer than this one. Maybe you'll move to Denver, or even San Francisco." San Francisco, Denver, cities Clara had never seen and couldn't imagine. Places where society ladies held tea parties and discussed fashion instead of drought and cattle prices. Places where no one knew about a wild-haired boy who'd once made her laugh until her sides ached, who'd taught her to whistle like a meadowlark and swim in the creek despite her mother's horror. "What is it? Dear, you've gone pale." Her mother's brow creased with concern. "Just the stays. Mama, they're very tight." Beauty requires sacrifice, but Margaret's fingers were already working to loosen the laces slightly. "There, better." Clara nodded, turning back to face the mirror. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, elegant, refined, everything a mayor's daughter should be. The dress transformed her from Clara into something else entirely, like those chrysalises she and Lucas used to find on the cottonwood trees, except in reverse. She was being wrapped up, contained, prepared for a life of careful smiles and proper behavior. Lucas, even thinking his name sent a sharp pain through her chest. "I'll need to check on the preparations for tomorrow's breakfast," her mother said, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her own skirts. "The Hendersons, the Palmers, Judge Morrison and his wife, oh, and the Reverend's family. Of course, 23 guests in total for the wedding breakfast. Mrs. Garcia has been cooking since dawn." Clara barely heard the list of names. Her eyes had caught on something outside the window, a rider on a black horse, moving slow down Main Street. For one wild moment, her heart leaped. But no, it was just Tom Bradley from the Double K Ranch, probably in town for supplies. It had been 12 years since Lucas Hart disappeared. 12 years since she'd waited by their cottonwood tree. watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Certain he'd come. He'd promised to meet her there after finishing his chores at the Patterson ranch. But he never came. The next morning, she'd learned that old Mr. Patterson had died in the night heart gave out, the doctor said, and Lucas was gone. No one knew where. Some said he'd stolen a horse, though the Pattersons insisted nothing was missing. Others figured he'd hopped a freight train, headed for California or maybe Colorado. Boy like that, with no family and no prospects. What reason did he have to stay? Clara had reasons. Promises whispered under starlight. Plans made by two youngsters who thought love could overcome anything: poverty, social standing, her father's certain disapproval. She'd waited by that tree every evening for a month until her mother discovered her absences and put an end to them with a switching that left her unable to sit comfortably for a week. "Clara, are you listening?" She blinked, focusing on her mother's concerned face. "I'm sorry. Mama, what were you saying?" "I asked if you wanted to wear grandmother's pearl necklace or the new one Edward gave you for the ceremony." "Grandmother's, please." The pearls were simpler, older, had belonged to a woman who'd crossed the prairie in a covered wagon and built a life from nothing. They seemed more honest somehow. Her mother nodded approvingly. "A lovely choice. Very appropriate. Now, let's get you out of this dress before Mrs. Henderson arrives. We wouldn't want it to wrinkle." As Margaret helped her daughter undress, she noticed the faraway look in Clara's eyes, the mechanical way she moved. "My dear," she said softly, "I know this all seems overwhelming. Marriage is a big step, but you'll see Edward will make you happy. He's steady, reliable, comes from good stock. Those are the things that matter in a marriage." "What about love, Mama?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a snuffed candle. Margaret's hand stilled on the buttons. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "Love comes in many forms. Clara, the love between a husband and wife is built on respect, shared values, common goals. It grows over time, like a garden carefully tended. It's not like those wild emotions young girls sometimes fancy themselves to feel. Those burn bright but brief, like prairie fire. They leave nothing but ash." Clara said nothing. She'd felt that prairie fire once, felt it consume her until she thought she might die from the burning. And perhaps part of her had died when it was extinguished. The Clara who'd run barefoot through grass, who'd climbed trees and raced horses and laughed with abandon, that girl was as gone as Lucas' heart. "There," her mother said, hanging the wedding dress back in the wardrobe with reverent hands. "Tomorrow at this time, you'll be preparing to walk down the aisle. Your father is so proud. Clara, this match will secure our family's position for generations. The Wells and Langston names united, it's everything we've worked for." Clara watched her mother leave, waiting until the footsteps faded down the hallway before she moved, still in her chemise and corset. She walked to the window that faced west, toward the creek and the cottonwood grove beyond. The trees were taller now, their leaves shimmering silver green in the morning light. If she squinted, she could almost see two children racing through the grass, the girl's braids flying behind her as she tried to keep up with the long-legged boy who always let her catch him in the end. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Clara, Mrs. Henderson's here for your fitting." "Thank you, Rosa. Tell her I'll be down directly." Clara took one last look at the cottonwood trees, then turned away. Tomorrow she would marry Edward Langston. She would smile and say the right words and become the wife everyone expected her to be. The dress hanging in her wardrobe wasn't just silk and lace and pearls. It was armor, beautiful armor for a battle she'd already lost. She dressed quickly in her day clothes, smoothing her hair into the severe style her mother preferred. As she descended the stairs to meet Mrs. Henderson, she practiced her smile in the hallway mirror. It was a good smile, convincing. No one would guess that underneath, her heart felt like it had been wrapped in silk chains, each stay pulled tighter until she could barely remember how to breathe. The fitting passed in a blur of pins and adjustments. Mrs. Henderson chattering about how lucky Clara was, how handsome Edward looked in his new suit, how the whole town was buzzing with excitement about tomorrow's wedding. Clara nodded and smiled and said the right things, while inside, that wild prairie girl whispered a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Lucas Hart, the boy who disappeared like morning mist, leaving nothing behind but memories and a broken promise under a cottonwood tree. The afternoon sun was merciless as Clara escaped the house, claiming she needed air after the lengthy fitting. Her mother, distracted by wedding preparations, barely noticed her departure. Clara's feet carried her without conscious thought, following a path worn by memory rather than recent use. The cottonwood grove stood like an oasis along the creek, its massive trees casting blessed shade over the dusty ground. Clara paused at the edge, her hand resting on the rough bark of the first tree. 12 years had added to its girth, but she could still see the initials carved there, C.W. plus L.H. Surrounded by a crooked heart, Lucas had used his pocket knife, tongue poking out in concentration as he worked. "It's forever now," he'd said, grinning at her with that smile that made her stomach flutter. "Trees remember everything." Clara traced the letters with her fingertip. The carving had stretched and distorted with the tree's growth, but it remained readable, like her memories changed by time but stubbornly persistent. She moved deeper into the grove, her fine leather boots unsuitable for the uneven ground. Once, she'd run here barefoot, her feet tough as leather from summers without shoes. The Wells family hadn't always lived in the big house on Main Street. Her father had started as a clerk in the general store, working his way up through shrewd business sense and political acumen. The fancy dresses and imported furnishings came later, after he'd become mayor. But here, in the shadow of the cottonwoods, she could almost forget the transformation. The old swimming hole was smaller than she remembered, the creek running low in the late summer heat. Clara sat on the large flat rock that jutted over the water, not caring that her dress would be dusty. This had been their place, hers and Lucas's. She closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her like creek water. Lucas Hart had arrived at the Patterson Ranch when they were both 7, a skinny boy with sun-bleached hair and clothes that barely fit. Orphaned, the church ladies whispered. Parents died of fever somewhere back east. The Pattersons took him in because they needed the help and because Mrs. Patterson had a soft heart beneath her stern exterior. Clara first saw him at Sunday service, sitting in the back row with the other ranch hands, his hair slicked down with water that dripped onto his collar. When their eyes met during the hymn singing, he'd crossed his eyes and stuck out his tongue just slightly, making her giggle so hard her mother had pinched her arm. After that, they were inseparable whenever their duties allowed. Lucas taught her things no proper young lady should know: how to whistle through her teeth to call the horses, how to catch crawdads in the shallow pools, how to skip stones so they danced across the water like flying birds, how to climb the tallest cottonwood to see the mountains stretching purple in the distance. In return, Clara shared her lessons. She taught him to read better, smuggling books from her father's small library. She showed him how to dance, humming the tunes from the town socials they were both too young to attend properly. She shared the cookies and cakes her mother baked, meeting him at the grove with her pockets full of treats. "Why do you come here?" she'd asked him once when they were 13, sprawled on this very rock after swimming, letting the sun dry their clothes. "You could make friends with the boys from town, play with them instead." Lucas had been quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "They look at me like I'm less than them, like being an orphan means I'm marked somehow. But you..." He'd turned those green eyes on her, serious as she'd ever seen him. "You look at me like I'm worth something." "You are worth something," she'd said fiercely. "Worth everything." That was the day he'd kissed her. Just a quick press of lips, both of them red-faced and awkward after. But something had changed between them, a awareness that made every accidental touch spark like lightning. By 15, they were planning a future together with the earnest certainty of youth. Lucas would save his wages, Maybe get work at one of the bigger ranches up north. Clara would convince her father that marrying for love was more important than marrying for position. They'd have a little place of their own. Nothing fancy. Maybe some chickens, a milk cow, a vegetable garden. Children who'd run wild and free like they had. "I'll make you happy, Clara," Lucas had promised, holding her hands in his work-roughened ones. They were 17, and the world seemed full of possibilities. "I know I ain't got much now, but I'll work hard. Harder than any man in the territory. You'll never want for anything." "I don't need much," she'd told him. "Just you." They'd set a date to run away together after the harvest, when Lucas would collect his wages from Mr. Patterson. He'd been working extra hours, taking on additional chores, saving every penny. Clara had been gathering things too, practical items they'd need for starting a household. Hidden in the back of her wardrobe were dish towels she'd embroidered, a quilt she'd pieced together from scraps, a small bag of coins saved from her allowance. The last time she saw him was a Tuesday evening in September. The cottonwoods were just starting to turn gold at the edges, and the air held that crisp promise of autumn. Lucas had been excited, almost fevered with plans. 2 more weeks. Clara, 2 more weeks and we'll be free. I've got almost enough saved for train fare to Denver. We can get married there, find work. I heard they need good hands at the stockyards. And you could take in sewing or maybe work at one of them fancy shops. She'd laughed at his enthusiasm, caught up in the dream. They'd kissed beneath their carved initials. A proper kiss this time, full of promise and barely restrained passion. "I love you, Clara Wells," he'd whispered against her lips. "Have since the day you giggled in church." "I love you too, Lucas Hart, forever and always." He'd left her there as the sun set, promising to meet her tomorrow evening to finalize their plans. Clara had practically floated home, her lips still tingling, her heart so full she thought it might burst. But tomorrow never came. Not for them. Clara opened her eyes, blinking away tears she hadn't realized were falling. The sun was lower now, painting the grove in shades of gold that reminded her of Lucas's hair. She could still see him so clearly, the way he'd pushed that unruly lock back from his forehead, the dimple that appeared when he smiled, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners from squinting in the sun. After he disappeared, she'd haunted this place. Every evening for a month, she'd waited on this rock, certain he'd appear through the trees with some explanation. An injury that had laid him up, a misunderstanding about the date, urgent business that had delayed him. Anything but the truth that he'd left without a word, without a goodbye, without her. Her father had been almost kind when she'd finally broken down and confessed everything. "The boy likely got scared," Mayor Wells had said, patting her shoulder awkwardly. "Marriage is a big responsibility. He probably realized he couldn't provide for you properly and thought it best to leave. It's for the best. Clara, you're meant for better things than being a ranch hand's wife." But Clara had seen the relief in his eyes. Her father had never approved of her friendship with Lucas, had been making noises about sending her to finishing school in Denver to expand her social circle. Lucas's disappearance had solved a problem he hadn't yet figured out how to handle. The theories about why Lucas left had circulated through town like tumbleweeds. Some said he'd gotten into trouble, maybe killed someone and had to run. Others thought he'd stolen money from the Pattersons, though they denied it. The romantic gossip suspected a girl in trouble, though no one could name who. The practical folks figured he'd simply seen an opportunity for a better life elsewhere and taken it. Clara had her own theory, one she'd never voiced aloud. Mr. Patterson's death had been sudden but not entirely unexpected. He'd had heart problems for years. What if someone had made it clear to Lucas that with his employer dead, an orphan with no connections had better make himself scarce? What if someone had threatened him, or worse, threatened her if he didn't leave? She'd never asked her father directly. She was too afraid of the answer. A twig snapped behind her, and Clara turned, half expecting to see Lucas materialize like a ghost from her memories. But it was only a deer, picking its way to the water's edge. It regarded her with liquid eyes before bending to drink. Tomorrow she would marry Edward Langston. Tomorrow she would speak vows in the church where she'd first seen Lucas Hart. Tomorrow she would become the woman everyone expected her to be. But today, in the sanctuary of the Cottonwoods, she allowed herself to remember the girl she'd been, the girl who'd loved with her whole heart, who'd believed in forever, who'd carved her initials in tree bark and meant it. The sun was setting by the time Clara made her way back to town. Her mother would be frantic, but Clara couldn't bring herself to hurry. Each step felt like a goodbye to the grove, to her memories, to the ghost of Lucas Hart that had haunted her for 12 years. As she reached the edge of town, she turned for one last look at the cottonwoods, their leaves now gilded by the dying light. Somewhere out there, Lucas was living his life. Maybe he had a wife now, children. Maybe he'd forgotten all about the mayor's daughter who'd loved him. Maybe their summer of dreams meant nothing to him now. "Goodbye," she whispered to the wind. Tomorrow, she would marry Edward Langston. But tonight, in her dreams, she knew she'd be 17 again, kissing Lucas Hart beneath the cottonwoods while the world stretched endless and golden before them. The evening air hung heavy with the scent of roses from her mother's garden as Clara sat at her vanity, mechanically brushing her hair, 100 strokes, as her mother had taught her. Tomorrow at this time, she would be Mrs. Edward Langston, preparing for her wedding night in a hotel room in Denver where they would honeymoon. A distant rumble of hoofbeats made her pause, brush suspended mid-stroke. It was unusual for riders to come through town this late, especially at such a measured pace. Not the wild gallop of cowboys returning from the saloons, nor the urgent speed of someone bearing news. This was deliberate, purposeful. The hoofbeats stopped. Clara resumed brushing, though her hand trembled slightly. Probably just a late traveler seeking lodging at Mrs. Miller's boarding house? Nothing to do with her. "Clara," her mother's voice carried up the stairs, oddly strained. "We have a visitor. Please come down." A visitor. At this hour. The night before her wedding, Clara set down her brush and reached for her shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders. She was already in her nightgown and wrapper, hardly proper attire for receiving guests. But surely her mother wouldn't have called her unless... Her heart began to pound as she descended the stairs, each step feeling like a lifetime. The parlor doors were closed, but she could hear voices within her father's stern tones, her mother's higher pitch, and a third voice that made her grab the banister for support. Deep, measured, with that slight drawl that came from spending years in the saddle. No, it couldn't be. Clara pushed open the parlor doors and froze. He stood with his back to the fireplace, hat in his hands, and for a moment she thought she might faint. 12 years had transformed the lanky boy into a man, but she would have known him anywhere. The same sun-streaked hair, though darker now and neatly trimmed, the same broad shoulders, though they filled out his coat in a way that spoke of hard physical labor, the same green eyes that found hers across the room and held. "Lucas," she breathed. "Hello, Clara." His voice was exactly as she remembered, though deeper, more assured. He wore good clothes, not fancy, but well-made. Clean boots, pressed trousers, a coat that fit properly. Wherever he'd been, he hadn't been struggling. Mr. Hart was just explaining that he's been in Wyoming," her father said, his tone carefully neutral. Mayor Wells sat rigid in his chair, every inch the political man assessing a potential threat. Apparently, he's done quite well for himself in the horse trade. "I own a ranch now," Lucas said, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "Nothing grand, but it's mine, free and clear. 500 head of horses, some cattle, good land with water rights." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely breathe. He was here. Lucas was here, standing in her parents' parlor the night before her wedding, looking at her like she was water in the desert. "How enterprising," her mother managed. though her smile was strained. "We heard you'd left after poor Mr. Patterson passed. Such a tragedy." "Yes, ma'am. It was sudden." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, pain, maybe, or anger quickly suppressed. "I felt it best to make my own way after that." "And now you've returned," Mayor Wells said. It wasn't a question. "Rather interesting timing, wouldn't you say?" Lucas finally looked away from Clara to meet her father's gaze. "I heard about the wedding. News travels. Even to Wyoming, He paused, his jaw working. "I needed to pay my respects, to wish Miss Wells happiness in her marriage." The words were correct, proper, but Clara heard what lay beneath them, the barely controlled emotion that made his knuckles white where he gripped his hat. "How thoughtful," her mother said, though she looked anything but pleased. "Though it is rather late for a social call. Perhaps you could return tomorrow after the ceremony." "No." Clara found her voice at last. Everyone turned to look at her. "That is, Mr. Hart has come all this way. Surely we can offer him some hospitality." She moved into the room on unsteady legs, hyper-aware of her state of undress, of the way Lucas's eyes tracked her movement. She took a seat on the settee, arranging her wrapper more securely around herself. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Hart, or perhaps something stronger?" "Coffee would be fine, ma'am. Thank you." Her mother rang for Rosa, who appeared quickly, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. The maid had been with them long enough to remember Lucas, to remember the hours Clara had spent crying in her room after he'd left. An uncomfortable silence settled over the parlor. Clara's parents sat like sentinels, clearly unwilling to leave their daughter alone with this ghost from her past. Lucas stood by the fireplace, turning his hat in his hands, looking everywhere but at her. 500 horses, Clara said finally, desperate to fill the silence. "That's impressive. You've done well for yourself." "I was lucky. Found work with the outfit moving horses to the army forts. Learned the business. Saved my wages. When old Sam Morrison decided to sell out, I had enough for a down payment. Been building it up ever since." "And you never married?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Her mother made a small sound of disapproval. "No." Lucas's eyes found hers again. "Never found the right woman." The air in the room grew thick, charged with unspoken words. Clara felt her cheeks burn, aware of her father's sharp gaze, her mother's discomfort. Rosa returned with the coffee service, the familiar ritual of pouring and serving providing a brief respite from the tension. Lucas accepted his cup with thanks, his fingers steady despite everything. "Mr. Hart," Mayor Wells said, his tone making it clear this was an interrogation, not conversation. "You say you came to pay your respects. You've done so. Now, given the late hour and the fact that my daughter needs her rest before tomorrow's ceremony." "Of course." Lucas set down his untouched coffee and straightened. "I apologize for the intrusion. He looked at Clara one more time, and she saw everything in that look. 12 years of regret, 12 years of longing, 12 years of love that hadn't dimmed despite time and distance. "I wanted to see you happy," he finished quietly. "To know you were well." Clara stood abruptly. "I'll walk you to the door." "Clara," her mother protested. "It's only proper, Mother." Her voice was stronger than she felt. "Mr. Hart is a guest in our home." She led him through the foyer, aware of her parents watching from the parlor doorway. "At the front door." Lucas paused, looking down at her with those green eyes that had haunted her dreams. "You look beautiful," he said softly, "even more than I remembered." "Lucas." "I'm staying at Mrs. Miller's boarding house, room at the back, overlooking the garden." The words came out in a rush, urgent. If there's anything—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. I just needed to see you one more time." He put on his hat and stepped onto the porch, Clara watched him walk to his horse, a beautiful black stallion that showed his success as clearly as his clothes. He swung into the saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life horseback. "Lucas," she called softly. He turned. "The cottonwood tree, our tree, the initials are still there." Something broke in his expression then, raw pain flashing across his features before he controlled it. "Clara, Mr. Hart," her father's voice cut through the night. "I believe you are leaving." Lucas touched his hat brim. "Mayor, Mrs. Wells, Miss Wells, I wish you all the best." Then he was gone, the hoofbeats of his horse fading into the night, leaving Clara standing in the doorway, feeling like her heart was being torn from her chest all over again. "Inside. Clara, now!" Her father's hand was firm on her arm, guiding her back to the parlor. "Sit." She sat, feeling like a child about to be scolded. "That was quite a performance," Mayor Wells said coldly. "Showing up here the night before your wedding. The nerve of that boy." "He's not a boy anymore," Clara said quietly. "No," her mother agreed, surprising her. "He's certainly not, which makes this even more inappropriate. Clara, darling, I know you had feelings for him once, but that was childish infatuation. Tomorrow you marry Edward." "I know." "Do you?" Her father leaned forward. "Because I see the way you looked at him, the way he looked at you. That man didn't ride all the way from Wyoming to wish you well. He came here to cause trouble. He came to say goodbye." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Good. Then it's done." Mayor Wells stood. "You'll go to bed now. You'll put this from your mind. Tomorrow you'll marry Edward Langston as planned. And Lucas Hart will return to Wyoming where he belongs. Is that clear?" "Yes, Father." But as Clara climbed the stairs to her room, she knew it was anything but clear. Lucas was here. Not disappeared, not dead, not married to someone else. Here, in Dusty Hollow, staying at Mrs. Miller's boarding house in the room overlooking the garden. She closed her bedroom door and leaned against it, her heart racing. Through her window, she could see the moon rising over the cottonwoods in the distance, the same moon that had witnessed their promises, their dreams, their kisses. In 12 hours, she would walk down the aisle to marry Edward Langston. But tonight, Lucas Hart was just a few streets away, and everything she'd tried to bury for 12 years had come roaring back to life. Clara moved to her window, looking out at the sleeping town. Somewhere out there. Was Lucas looking at the same moon? Was he thinking of her? Was he regretting his return, or planning something more? She touched the glass, remembering another night when she'd stood at this window, watching for a boy who never came. Now he was here, but it was too late. Wasn't it? The house had been quiet for over an hour, her parents long since retired. When Clara heard it 3 soft taps, a pause, then 2 more, her heart stopped. That rhythm, that exact pattern, was their old signal from years ago. Lucas used to throw pebbles at her window just like that when he wanted to meet her at the Cottonwood Grove. She lay frozen in her bed, wondering if she'd imagined it. Then it came again. 3 taps, pause, 2 more. Clara slipped from her bed, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. At the window, she peered down into the moonlit garden. There, half hidden in the shadow of her mother's rose arbor, stood a familiar figure. She should ignore him, should return to bed and pretend she hadn't heard. Tomorrow she would be another man's wife. But her hands were already working the window latch, easing it open just enough to lean out. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice carrying on the still night air. "I had to see you." Lucas stepped into the moonlight, and her breath caught. "Please, Clara, just for a moment. I know I have no right, but my parents are asleep." I watched the lights go out. He paused, then added with a ghost of his old grin. "Besides, when did that ever stop us?" Against every sensible thought in her head, Clara found herself reaching for her wrapper. She slipped it on over her nightgown, then eased her door open. The house was dark, silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. She knew every creaking board, every squeaky step from years of sneaking out to meet Lucas. Her feet found the safe spots automatically. The back door opened without a sound. She'd oiled the hinges herself just last week, preparing for the constant traffic of wedding preparations. Then she was outside, the cool night air raising goosebumps on her skin. Lucas waited by the garden gate, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Without a word, he turned and began walking, knowing she would follow. They moved through the sleeping town like ghosts, keeping to the shadows, taking the old familiar path that led to the creek. Not until they reached the shelter of the cottonwoods did either speak. "You shouldn't have come back," Clara said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Why now, Lucas? Why tonight?" He turned to face her, and in the moonlight filtering through the leaves, she could see the anguish in his eyes. "I tried to stay away. God knows I tried. But when I heard you were marrying him..." He shook his head. "I had to know. Had to see for myself if you loved him." "Love," Clara laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "What does love have to do with marriage? You taught me that 12 years ago when you left without a word." "Clara." "No." She held up a hand. "You don't get to come back here the night before my wedding and pretend you care about my happiness. Where were you, Lucas? Where were you when I waited by this tree every night for a month? When I cried myself to sleep wondering if you were dead, when they started bringing suitors around and I had to smile and serve tea and pretend my heart wasn't buried somewhere with you? I never wanted to leave you." The words burst from him like water through a dam. "Clara, you have to believe that. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done." "Then why?" Her voice broke on the word. "We had plans, dreams. You promised." "I know what I promised." Lucas ran his hands through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "And I meant every word. But that night, after Mr. Patterson died..." He stopped, jaw working as if fighting the words. Clara waited, barely breathing. "Your father came to see me," he finally said. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. "What?" "That night, after they took Mr. Patterson's body away. Your father and 2 of his men, Deputy Langston was one of them." Lucas's laugh was harsh. "Ironic, isn't it? They made it very clear what would happen if I didn't leave immediately. Not just to me, to you." "My father threatened you." "He threatened you?" Lucas's voice was raw. "Said if I didn't disappear, he'd send you away to some school back east where they'd beat the wildness out of you. Said he had connections, could make sure you ended up somewhere that would break your spirit. Or worse, he mentioned an asylum in Philadelphia where they sent wayward daughters." Clara's hand went to her throat. She knew the place he meant. The Bradshaw family had sent their daughter there for the crime of refusing a marriage. She'd come back 2 years later a shadow of herself, speaking in whispers, flinching at sudden movements. "He said the only thing keeping you safe was his reputation," Lucas continued. "But if word got out about us, about how far things had gone. But nothing had happened. We'd only kissed." "He didn't care about the truth. He cared about appearances. A mayor's daughter running wild with an orphaned ranch hand." Lucas shook his head. "He gave me a choice. Leave that night and never contact you again, or stay and watch you suffer for it. He even gave me money, said it was severance pay from the Pattersons. But I knew better. It was 30 pieces of silver to betray what we had." Clara sank onto the familiar flat rock by the water's edge, her legs unable to hold her. All these years, she'd wondered, created scenarios in her mind, but never this, never her own father orchestrating it all. "I threw the money back in his face," Lucas said, moving to stand before her. "Told him I'd leave, but I wouldn't take his bribe. I saddled up and rode out that night with nothing but the clothes on my back and the wages I'd saved." He knelt in the dirt before her, looking up into her face. I wanted to leave you a message, something, anything, but they watched me pack, escorted me to the town limits, said if I tried to contact you, they'd make good on their threats. 12 years, Clara whispered. You stayed away 12 years. I wrote letters I never sent, started back a dozen times only to turn around. I told myself you'd moved on, found someone else, that you'd forgotten the foolish boy who'd loved you. His hand hovered near hers, not quite touching. Then I heard about the engagement. Edward Langston, the same man who'd helped run me out of town. I had to come. To do what? Clara asked. To torture me, to show me what I lost. I'm getting married tomorrow. Lucas, the whole town is expecting it. The food is prepared. The church is decorated. The guests have traveled. Do you love him? The question hung between them like a blade. Does it matter? It's the only thing that matters. Lucas's eyes bored into hers. Tell me you love him. Clara, tell me he makes you happy. Tell me when he kisses you, you feel even a fraction of what we had. Tell me that and I'll leave tonight. You'll never see me again. Clara looked away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. Edward is a good man. He'll provide well. That's not what I asked. He's respected in the community. My parents approve. Clara, Lucas's voice was gentle now. Do you love him? The tears came then, 12 years' worth, flowing down her cheeks in the moonlight. No, she whispered. I don't love him. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But every time he touches my hand, I think of yours. Every time he smiles at me, I remember your dimples. He's talking about our future, and all I can think about is the past. Lucas made a sound like he'd been punched. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something that caught the moonlight. A ring. Simple gold band with a small pearl, nothing like the ostentatious diamond Edward had given her. But Clara recognized it immediately. It was my mother's, Lucas said quietly. The only thing I had of hers, I've carried it for 12 years, hoping, praying that somehow. He swallowed hard. I know I have no right. I know tomorrow you're supposed to marry him. But Clara, I'm not that powerless boy anymore. I have land, money, a future to offer. Your father can't threaten me now. Lucas, marry me. The words hung in the night air like stars. Not tomorrow. Tonight. We'll ride to Carson City. I know a judge there who owes me a favor. He'll marry us. No questions asked. By the time the sun rises, it'll be done. Legal, binding. No one could separate us again. Clara stared at the ring, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might escape her chest. You're asking me to run away in my nightgown, to leave my family, my life, everything I've known. I'm asking you to choose love. Lucas's voice was steady now. Sure. I'm asking you to be brave one more time, to take the chance we should have taken 12 years ago. I've built a good life in Wyoming. Clara, a lonely one, but good. The ranch house needs a woman's touch. The horses need someone who can gentle them better than my rough hands. And I need you. I've always needed you. My father will never forgive me. The scandal will pass. Scandals always do, but regret that lasts forever. He held up the ring, and it seemed to capture all the moonlight, all the promises they'd ever made. I let fear drive me away once. I won't make that mistake again. The question is, will you? Clara looked at him, really looked. The boy she'd loved had become a man worth loving, strong, determined, successful despite every obstacle. He'd honored her memory by never marrying another, just as she'd honored his by keeping their initials carved in tree bark. But tomorrow, 300 people would fill the church. The wedding breakfast was prepared. Her dress hung ready. Edward would be waiting at the altar, steady and reliable and completely wrong for her. I don't even have clothes, she said weakly. Just my nightgown and wrapper. I'll buy you a dozen dresses in Carson City. 100 if you want them. Lucas leaned closer. though you're beautiful just as you are. You always have been. This is madness. Maybe. He smiled then, that dimpled grin that had first made her giggle in church. But it's our madness. It always has been. Clara reached for the ring, her fingers trembling. It was warm from his pocket, from being carried next to his heart for 12 years. Such a small thing to represent such an enormous choice. "If I say yes," she whispered, "if I put this ring on, there's no going back. You understand that we'd have to leave tonight. Now, no goodbyes, no explanations. I have 2 horses at the boarding house, supplies in my saddlebags. We could be in Carson City by tomorrow afternoon." His green eyes never left hers. "All you have to do is say yes." Clara closed her eyes, seeing 2 paths stretching before her. One led to the church, to Edward, to a life of propriety and position and slow suffocation. The other led into the unknown with a man who'd loved her enough to let her go and brave enough to come back. When she opened her eyes, Lucas was still there, patient as the cottonwoods, steady as the creek that had witnessed their young love. "Ask me again," she said. Understanding flashed in his eyes. He took the ring from her trembling fingers and held it up properly. "Clara Wells," he said, his voice strong and sure. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my love for all the days we have left? Will you take a chance on the life we should have had?" Clara stared at the ring Lucas held, her mother's pearl catching the moonlight like a captured star. Her heart hammered against her ribs as if trying to escape the choice before her. Everything she'd been taught, every expectation placed upon her, warred with the wild hope that bloomed in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, Lucas, I'll marry you." His face transformed with joy, the years of hardship and loneliness melting away as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the ring that sealed their promise. "We need to move quickly," he said. "All business now that the decision was made. Can you ride in what you're wearing?" Clara looked down at her nightgown and wrapper. "I'll need my boots at least, and perhaps my cloak. I can't very well arrive at a judge's house dressed like this." "There's a general store in Millerton, about 3 hours' ride. We'll stop there, get you proper clothes." Lucas stood, pulling her up with him. "I'll get the horses. Meet you behind the blacksmith shop in 15 minutes. Can you manage that?" She nodded, though her mind raced. 15 minutes to gather what she could, to leave behind the only life she'd known. But looking at Lucas, seeing the determination in his eyes, she knew she'd already made her choice 12 years ago under these very trees. They parted at the edge of town, Lucas heading for the boarding house while Clara crept back to her parents' home. The house seemed different now, already becoming a memory. She slipped inside, wincing at every small sound. In her room, she worked by moonlight, not daring to light a lamp. Her riding boots were in the wardrobe. Along with her heavy cloak, she grabbed her small sewing basket, practical things they'd need. From her jewelry box, she took only her grandmother's pearls and the small amount of money she'd saved. Edward's diamond engagement ring she left on the dresser, its cold brilliance a stark contrast to the warm pearl on her finger. The wedding dress hung like a specter in the corner. Clara paused, looking at it one last time. By tomorrow, it would become a symbol of scandal, the dress the runaway bride never wore. She felt a pang of guilt for the embarrassment her parents would face, for Edward's humiliation, for the gossip that would consume the town. But then she thought of Lucas's face when she'd said yes, of the 12 years they'd lost to fear and propriety, and her resolve strengthened. She grabbed paper and pen, scrawling a quick note. "Mother and father, I cannot marry Edward. My heart belongs to another and always has. I am sorry for the pain and embarrassment this will cause. Please know I love you both, but I must choose love over duty. Clara." It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but it would have to do. Clara made her way downstairs one last time, pausing at the door to her parents' room. She could hear her father's steady snoring, her mother's quieter breathing. For a moment, she almost weakened. They'd given her everything, provided for her, loved her in their way. But their love came with conditions, with expectations that would slowly suffocate her. She touched their door gently, a silent goodbye, then slipped out into the night. The blacksmith's shop stood dark and quiet at the edge of town. Clara pressed herself into the shadows, her bundle clutched tight. Every sound made her jump, a dog barking, the distant music from one of the saloons, the wind rattling a loose shutter. If someone saw her now, dressed like this, the scandal would begin before she could escape. Then she heard them horses approaching at a walk. Lucas materialized from the darkness, leading 2 mounts, his black stallion and a gentle-looking bay mare. He'd changed into traveling clothes, a long duster over his outfit, saddlebags bulging with supplies. "You came," he breathed, as if he'd doubted until this moment. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought maybe when you got back to that big house, when you saw your wedding dress." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. You're here." He helped her bundle into one of the saddlebags, then lifted her onto the mare with gentle hands. Clara arranged her nightgown and wrapper as best she could, grateful for the cloak that covered the impropriety of her dress. "Her name's Buttercup," Lucas said, patting the mare's neck. "Gentlest horse I've got. She'll take good care of you." Clara leaned forward, stroking the mare's mane. "Hello, Buttercup. We're going on an adventure. You and I—" Lucas swung onto his stallion with easy grace. "Stay close. We'll take the back trails until we're well clear of town. Less chance of meeting anyone." They rode in silence through the sleeping streets, keeping to the shadows. Clara's heart pounded with each hoofbeat, certain that at any moment someone would raise the alarm. But the town slumbered on, unaware that the mayor's daughter was escaping her fate. Only when they'd crested the hill outside town did Lucas urge their horses to a faster pace. Clara looked back once at Dusty Hollow spread below, the church spire where she should have been married rising above the other buildings. Then she turned her face forward, toward the mountains and the unknown future beyond. They rode hard for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and pursuit. Clara had always been a good rider, but never in her night clothes, never with such desperate purpose. The night air whipped her hair loose from its braid, and she felt wild, free in a way she hadn't since she was 17. When Lucas finally slowed their pace, they were deep in the hill country, following trails she didn't recognize. "You know where we're going?" she asked. "Like the back of my hand. Rode these trails for 3 years moving horses." He guided his stallion closer to her mare. "How are you holding up?" "I'm running away in my nightgown to marry a man I haven't seen in 12 years. Clara said, "I think I might be losing my mind." Lucas grinned, that boyish expression that made her heart skip. "Maybe, but it's a beautiful madness." They stopped to rest the horses at a small spring, and Lucas produced food from his saddlebag's bread, cheese, dried beef, apples. Clara realized she was ravenous, having been too nervous to eat much at dinner. "Tell me about Wyoming," she said as they ate. "Tell me about this life you've built." His eyes lit up as he described the ranch, the valley it nestled in with mountains rising on 3 sides, the house he'd built with his own hands, adding rooms each year as his success grew, the horses that ran free across the grasslands, the small town nearby where everyone knew everyone else, the hard winters and glorious summers, the endless sky that made a man feel both small and infinite. "It's not an easy life," he admitted. "Not like what you're used to. There's no fancy shops or society parties. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles off. When winter storms hit, we might be snowed in for weeks." "But it's ours," Clara said softly. "That's what matters." "Ours," Lucas repeated, wonder in his voice. "I like the sound of that." They reached Millerton just as dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The general store was just opening. The proprietor looking curiously at the couple on horseback, the man in trail clothes, the woman wrapped in a cloak that couldn't quite hide her nightdress. "My wife needs some traveling clothes," Lucas said smoothly, helping Clara dismount. "We had to leave unexpectedly. Family emergency." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that Clara almost believed it herself. The shopkeeper's wife, a motherly woman with kind eyes, took one look at Clara and ushered her to the back of the store. "Poor dear, you must be exhausted. Come, let's find you something suitable." An hour later, Clara emerged transformed. The simple calico dress fit well enough, the sturdy boots were comfortable, and the shopkeeper's wife had helped her pin her hair into a proper style. She felt more herself than she had in years of silk and satin. Lucas's eyes warmed when he saw her. "Beautiful," he murmured, then louder, "Thank you, ma'am. We're much obliged." They purchased supplies, more food, a bedroll for Clara, ammunition for the rifle Lucas carried. The shopkeeper mentioned the recent Indian troubles to the north, and Lucas assured him they'd be careful. Back on the trail, Clara felt the reality of what she'd done settling in. By now, her mother would have come to wake her. The note would have been found. The alarm would have been raised. She could imagine the chaos, her mother in tears, her father bellowing orders, Edward arriving to find his bride gone. "Regrets?" Lucas asked, reading her mood. "No," Clara said, and found she meant it. "Just thinking about the storm we've left behind. Let it blow. We'll be far away." He reached across the space between their horses to squeeze her hand. "I know it's hard, leaving everything, but I promise you, Clara, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't regret this choice." "I know you will," she squeezed back. "You already have. You came back for me." They pushed on through the morning, the landscape changing as they climbed higher into the hills. Pine forests replaced the sparse desert vegetation, and the air grew cooler. Clara had never been this far from home, and despite everything, she felt a thrill of adventure. "Tell me about that night," she said as they watered the horses at a mountain stream. "After my father threatened you, tell me where you went." Lucas's face darkened at the memory. "I rode until dawn, no direction in mind, just away. Ended up in a mining camp in the Nevada mountains. Worked there through the winter. Dangerous work, but it paid well. Come spring, I had enough saved to move on." He told her about the years of drifting, working cattle drives and horse roundups, learning the business from men who'd spent their lives in the saddle, about the old rancher who'd taken him under his wing, teaching him about breeding and bloodlines, about the day he'd seen the valley in Wyoming and known he'd found home. "But it was never complete," he said softly. "I'd built a house, but it wasn't a home, not without you." They reached Carson City as the afternoon sun slanted low. The town bustled with activity miners and merchants, ladies with parasols and men in city suits. Clara felt conspicuous in her simple calico, aware of her wind-blown appearance. "Judge Morrison's office is just ahead." Lucas said, "You ready for this?" Clara touched the pearl ring on her finger, drawing strength from its presence. "I've been ready for 12 years. The judge was a stern-looking man with steel-gray whiskers, but his eyes kindled when he saw Lucas. "Hart didn't expect to see you back so soon. And who's this?" "The woman I'm going to marry, sir. Today, if you'll do us the honor." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. "In quite a hurry, aren't you?" "We've waited long enough," Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Mister, Hart and I have known each other since childhood. Circumstances separated us, but now we're together again. We'd like to make it official." The judge studied them both, taking in Clara's simple dress and wind-blown hair, Lucas's travel-worn appearance. Then he smiled. "I've seen enough couples to know true love when it walks through my door. Let me get my clerk and my wife to serve as witnesses." Clara sat at the small writing desk in their room at Carson City's modest hotel. staring at the blank paper before her. Outside, she could hear the evening sounds of the bustling town horses clip-clopping down the street, distant laughter from a saloon, the call of a newspaper boy hawking the evening edition. They were married. The simple gold band on her finger caught the lamplight as she turned her hand, still marveling at the reality of it. Just hours ago, Judge Morrison had pronounced them husband and wife in his cluttered office, with his clerk and wife serving as witnesses. No church bells, no gathering of society's finest, no silk wedding dress, just Lucas's green eyes holding hers as they spoke their vows, meaning every word. Now Lucas was downstairs arranging for supplies and sending telegrams about business matters, giving her time to rest and think. But rest wouldn't come. Her mind churned with the magnitude of what she'd done. By now, the scandal would be spreading through Dusty Hollow like wildfire. She could picture it, her mother collapsed in her chair, being fanned by the church ladies, her father pacing his study, barking orders to search parties, Edward standing at the altar in his fine suit, humiliated before the entire town. She dipped her pen in ink, then hesitated. What could she possibly say to make this right? Dearest mother, she finally began. By the time you read this, I will be married to Lucas Hart. I know this is not the life you envisioned for me, not the match you worked so hard to arrange. I know I have disappointed you terribly. Please understand that I could not marry Edward while loving another. It would have been a cruelty to him and a slow death to me. Lucas is a good man. Mother, he has built an honest life through hard work and determination. He loves me as Edward never could, not as a prize or a political alliance, but as a partner, an equal. I do not expect forgiveness. I know the embarrassment this has caused our family, but I hope someday you might understand that I chose love over duty, happiness over position. Isn't that what you would have wanted for me? Deep in your heart, I am well. I am safe. I am happier than I have been in 12 years. Your loving daughter, Clara Hart. She folded the letter carefully, sealing it with a drop of wax from the candle. Another piece of paper lay before her, and she knew she owed Edward something as well. Edward. I am deeply sorry for the pain and humiliation my actions have caused you. You deserved better than a bride who fled in the night. You are a good man who will make some woman a fine husband, a woman who can love you completely, as I could not. Please do not blame yourself. This was not about any failing on your part, but rather about a love that began long before you courted me and never truly ended despite the years between. I wish you every happiness. Clara. As she sealed the second letter, she heard Lucas's footsteps on the stairs. He entered quietly, as if afraid to disturb her, carrying a tray of food. Thought you might be hungry, he said, setting it on the small table by the window. The dining room was full of rough characters. Didn't figure you'd want to run that gauntlet tonight. Clara smiled at his thoughtfulness. Thank you. I was just writing to my mother and to Edward. A shadow crossed his face. Having second thoughts? No. She rose and went to him, placing her hands on his chest. Never. But they deserve some explanation, even if they never forgive me for it. Lucas covered her hands with his. I'm sorry it had to happen this way. You deserved better, a proper wedding, your family there, a celebration. I had what mattered, Clara said firmly. I had you. The rest is just trappings. They ate quietly. The simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread tasting better than any fancy wedding breakfast could have. Lucas told her about the arrangements he'd made: fresh horses for the morning, supplies for the journey to Wyoming, a telegram sent to his foreman to prepare the house for their arrival. It's a week's ride, maybe more if the weather turns. He said, we could take the train part way if you'd prefer. Be more comfortable for you. I've come this far on horseback. Clara said, I can manage the rest. Besides, I want to see the country, to understand this land you love so much. Lucas's smile warmed her more than the fire in the grate. "You'll love it too. Wait until you see the sunrise over the mountains, or the way the grass rolls like ocean waves in the wind. And the stars, Clara, the stars in Wyoming are like nothing you've ever seen." Later, as Clara prepared for bed behind the dressing screen, she felt a flutter of nerves. This was her wedding night, though nothing like the one that had been planned in Dusty Hollow. No fine nightgown from her trousseau, no grand bedroom in the honeymoon suite of Denver's finest hotel. Just a simple cotton nightdress purchased that afternoon, and a man who'd loved her faithfully for half their lives. When she emerged, Lucas was standing by the window, looking out at the night. He turned at her approach, and the love in his eyes made her forget every moment of doubt. "My wife," he said softly, wonderingly. "I've dreamed of saying that for so long." "My husband," she replied, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. He came to her slowly, giving her time to be sure. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were still those teenagers under the cottonwoods. But then Clara wound her arms around his neck, and 12 years of longing poured into that kiss, making it something deeper, richer, full of promise and passion long denied. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "I love you, Clara Hart," Lucas said. "I loved you at 7 when you giggled in church. I loved you at 17 when we carved our names in that tree. I loved you every day of the 12 years we were apart. And I'll love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Clara whispered. "Always have, always will." The night passed in whispered endearments and gentle discoveries. Clara had feared awkwardness, but there was only tenderness and joy in finally being together as they dreamed. When dawn light crept through the curtains, she lay in Lucas's arms, feeling more herself than she had in years. "No regrets?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Only that we lost so much time. Then we'll make up for it every day from now on." They rose and dressed. Clara in her practical traveling clothes, Lucas in his familiar ranch wear. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back wind-burned cheeks. Hair simply braided, calico dress instead of silk, but her eyes sparkled with life in a way they hadn't for 12 years. At the post office, Clara mailed her letters, knowing they would reach Dusty Hollow in a few days. By then, she'd be deep in the wilderness, beyond the reach of angry fathers and society's judgment. "Ready?" Lucas asked as they mounted their horses' new ones, fresh and strong for the long journey ahead. Clara took a last look at Carson City, at civilization and all its constraints. Then she turned her face toward the mountains and smiled. "I've been ready my whole life." They rode out as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Behind them lay scandal and broken expectations. Ahead stretched the unknown dangerous, uncertain, but theirs to face together. As they climbed into the foothills, Clara began to understand what Lucas had tried to describe, the vastness of it all, the sense of freedom in the endless sky. She'd lived her whole life in a box made of social expectations and family obligations. Now that box had shattered, and instead of feeling lost, she felt found. "Look," Lucas said, pointing ahead. "See that eagle?" Clara shaded her eyes, watching the bird soar on invisible currents. "It's beautiful." "Free," Lucas said. "Like us." They made good time that first day, stopping only to rest the horses and eat a quick meal. Lucas knew the trails well, choosing routes that kept them away from the more traveled roads. He was protective without being overbearing, always checking that she was comfortable, that the pace wasn't too much. As evening approached, they made camp in a sheltered grove of pines. Lucas was efficient in his movements, unsaddling horses, gathering wood, starting a fire. Clara tried to help, though she felt clumsy at these unfamiliar tasks. "I'll learn," she said when she fumbled with the bedroll. "Of course you will." Lucas took it from her gently, showing her the trick of it. "You've already learned the hardest thing. What's that? To be brave enough to choose happiness. They sat by the fire as darkness fell, eating a simple meal of beans and biscuits. The stars emerged one by one, then in multitudes, until the sky was a glittering tapestry. You were right, Clara breathed. The stars are magnificent. This is nothing. Wait until we get to Wyoming, away from everything. Sometimes I lie out under them and feel like I could reach up and touch heaven. Do you think they can see us? Clara asked quietly. My parents. Do you think they're looking for us? Lucas added another log to the fire. Maybe, probably, but we're well off the main roads, and they don't know where we're headed. Your father might guess Wyoming eventually, but it's a big territory. Would you fight him if he came? I'd fight the whole world for you, Lucas said simply. But I don't think it'll come to that. Your father's practical above all else. Once he realizes it's done, legal and binding, he'll let it be. The scandal of dragging you back would be worse than letting you go. Clara hoped he was right. But even if he wasn't, even if her father sent an army after them, she wouldn't go back. She'd tasted freedom now, felt what it was like to be with the man she loved. No force on earth could make her give that up. As the fire died to embers, they spread their bedrolls close together. Lucas showed her how to position herself for warmth, how to use her saddle as a pillow. It was far from the featherbed she was used to, but with Lucas beside her and the stars overhead, Clara felt more at peace than she had in years. Tell me about tomorrow, she said sleepily. Tomorrow we cross the Nevada line. The terrain gets rougher, but more beautiful too. There's a valley I know where wildflowers grow so thick you can barely see the ground, and a stream so clear you can count the pebbles on the bottom. And after that, day by day, mile by mile, until we reach home. He reached over to take her hand. Our home. Clara fell asleep holding his hand, the pearl ring warm on her finger, the stars standing witness to their love. Whatever came tomorrow, rough trails or smooth, sunshine or storm, they would face it together. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold as Clara opened her eyes. For a moment, she was disoriented. Where were the lace curtains of her bedroom, the familiar sounds of Dusty Hollow waking up? Then she felt the hard ground beneath her bedroll, saw the canopy of stars fading into morning blue, and remembered she was free. Lucas was already up, tending to the horses and rekindling the fire. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd spent years living under open skies. When he saw her stirring, his face lit up with that smile that had first made her heart skip in church all those years ago. Morning, Mrs. Hart, he said softly. Coffee's almost ready. Mrs. Hart. The name sent a thrill through her. She sat up, wincing slightly at the stiffness in her muscles from sleeping on the ground. Good morning, Mr. Hart. As she worked to tidy her appearance as best she could with limited resources, Clara's fingers found the 2 letters she'd written the night before, still tucked in her travel bag. She held them for a long moment, feeling their weight not just physical, but emotional. These pieces of paper were her final connection to her old life. Second thoughts? Lucas asked gently, noticing her stillness. No, Clara said firmly. Just making peace with it all. She looked up at him. I need to send these when we reach the next town. After that, there's no turning back. There's already no turning back, Lucas reminded her. We're married, Clara, legal and binding. I know, but these letters, they make it final somehow. Real. Lucas came to kneel beside her, taking her hands in his. If you need more time. No. Clara squeezed his hands. I've had 12 years. These need to be sent. She carefully placed the letters back in her bag. They deserve to know I'm safe, that this was my choice. After a quick breakfast of coffee and hardtack, they broke camp and continued their journey. The landscape was changing as Lucas had promised, becoming wilder and more beautiful with each mile. Clara found herself mesmerized by the vastness of it all, mountains rising like ancient sentinels, valleys carpeted with late summer flowers, streams that sang their way down from hidden springs. "It's like another world," she breathed as they paused to water the horses at a crystal-clear creek. "It is another world," Lucas agreed. "Out here, it doesn't matter who your father is or what society expects. The land doesn't care about any of that. It only cares if you're strong enough to survive it, brave enough to love it." They reached the small town of Millbrook by mid-morning. It was barely more than a cluster of buildings along a dusty Main Street general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a tiny post office. Lucas helped Clara dismount, his hands lingering on her waist. "You sure about this?" he asked one more time. Clara pulled the letters from her bag, holding them against her heart for just a moment. Then she squared her shoulders and walked into the post office. The postmaster was a grizzled old man who barely looked up from his sorting. Clara placed the letters on the counter along with the postage fee. "These need to go to Dusty Hollow, Nevada," she said, her voice steady. The man glanced at the addresses, then at her, taking in her simple dress and the gold band on her finger. If he drew any conclusions, he kept them to himself. "They'll go out with tomorrow's stage," he said simply. Clara nodded her thanks and walked back out into the sunlight. Lucas was waiting with the horses, his expression concerned. "It's done," she said. "Now we go forward." They spent only long enough in Millbrook to replenish supplies. Clara was aware of the curious looks from the few townspeople they encountered. A woman in traveling clothes was unusual enough, and she and Lucas clearly had the look of newlyweds on the run. But no one challenged them, and soon they were back on the trail. As they rode, Clara found herself thinking about those letters winging their way back to Dusty Hollow. She imagined them arriving, the chaos they would cause. Her mother would weep, her father would rage. Edward would... what? Be humiliated, relieved. She realized she didn't know him well enough to guess. "Tell me about the ranch," she said to Lucas, needing to think about the future rather than the past. "Tell me about our home." Lucas's face softened. "The house sits on a rise overlooking the valley. It's not grand, started as just 2 rooms, but I've added on over the years. There's a big kitchen with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. A parlor with a stone fireplace I built myself. 3 bedrooms, though I've only been using 1. 3, Clara smiled. "Planning ahead." Lucas flushed slightly. "I always hoped. Well, I built it thinking of family, of you, though I never really believed you'd see it." "What else?" "There's a vegetable garden that my foreman's wife, Maria, has been tending. She's kept it going even though I told her not to bother. Said a house needed a garden to be a proper home. Seems she was right." He went on to describe the barn, the corrals, the bunkhouse where his handful of ranch hands lived, the remuda of horses that were his pride and joy, the cattle that provided steady income between horse sales, the challenges of winter, the glory of spring when the foals were born. Clara listened, painting pictures in her mind of this life he'd built. It was so different from what she'd known. No servants except the ranch hands, no society beyond the small local community, no fancy dress balls or afternoon teas. But it was real in a way her old life had never been. "I'll need to learn so much," she said. "I can't even milk a cow." "You'll learn," Lucas said confidently. "You're the smartest woman I know. Besides, you won't be alone. Maria will help, and the hands are good men. They'll respect you as the boss's wife." The boss's wife, another new identity to add to her collection. Mayor's daughter, almost bride of the deputy mayor's son. Runaway, wife, and now ranch mistress. Clara wondered which one was truest, then realized they all were. She was all of these things and more. They made good time through the afternoon, the horses fresh and the weather fair. Lucas knew every trail, every landmark. He pointed out places of interest, an old mine shaft from the gold rush days. a formation of rocks that looked like a castle, a meadow where he'd once seen a golden eagle take an antelope. As evening approached, they stopped at a traveler's shelter Lucas knew about, a rough cabin maintained by tradition for anyone who needed it. It was basic but clean, with a fireplace, a simple table, and bunks along one wall. "Better than the ground," Lucas said apologetically. "Tomorrow night we should reach Miller's Station. They have a proper inn there." "It's perfect," Clara said, and meant it. After sleeping under the stars, even this rough cabin felt luxurious. They tended the horses and gathered firewood together, Clara learning by watching Lucas's practiced movements. She was determined not to be a burden, to pull her weight in this new life. When she managed to get the fire started on her first try, Lucas's proud smile was better than any compliment she'd received in a ballroom. They had a simple supper of beans and bacon. With biscuits, Lucas cooked in a cast-iron pan over the fire. Clara watched, memorizing his techniques. She'd need these skills in Wyoming. "I've been thinking," she said as they cleaned up after the meal, "about my parents, about whether they'll come after us." Lucas paused in his work, and I think my father will let me go. Not because he forgives me, but because the scandal of forcing me back would be worse than letting me disappear. He's all about appearances, about political capital. A daughter who chose love over position can be explained away, eventually forgotten. But a daughter dragged kicking and screaming from her husband that would fuel gossip for years. "You might be right," Lucas agreed. "But if you're wrong, if he does come..." Clara met his eyes steadily. "Then we face him together. I'm your wife now. Lucas, in the eyes of God and law, no one can change that." They sat by the fire as darkness fell, Clara leaning against Lucas's shoulder, his arm around her. Through the cabin's single window, stars began to appear. Somewhere out there, her letters were traveling toward Dusty Hollow. By the time they arrived, she'd be even farther away, deeper into this new life. "I used to dream about this," Lucas said quietly. "Sitting by a fire with you, just talking, simple things, ordinary things, the kind of life other people take for granted." "Nothing about us has ever been ordinary," Clara pointed out. "No," he agreed. "But maybe now it can be. Maybe we've earned some ordinary happiness." They talked late into the night, filling in the gaps of 12 years. Lucas told her about the men he'd worked with, the places he'd seen, the hard lessons he'd learned. Clara shared her own stories, the suitable young men her parents had paraded before her, the suffocating rounds of social calls and charity work, the way she'd felt herself disappearing bit by bit until Lucas had appeared at her door. When they finally retired to the narrow bunks, Clara chose the one next to Lucas's without hesitation. The cabin was cold despite the fire, and she was grateful for his warmth, his presence. As she drifted toward sleep, she felt the weight of the day's decision settling over her. The letters were sent. The bridge was burned. Tomorrow she would wake up and continue riding toward Wyoming, toward a life she could barely imagine but already loved because it would be theirs. "Lucas," she whispered in the darkness. Thank you for coming back, for being brave enough when I wasn't." She felt him reach across the gap between bunks to find her hand. "You were brave. Clara, you chose love over everything else you'd been taught to value. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard work, the strength that had built a life from nothing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new landscapes, new lessons to learn. But tonight, in this rough cabin with her husband beside her and her letters of farewell speeding toward their destination, she was exactly where she belonged. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, night creatures called to each other, and wind sighed through the pines. Inside, two hearts that had been separated for 12 long years beat in rhythm once again, finally home in each other's presence. The thunder of hoofbeats shattered the morning peace. Clara and Lucas had been riding for 3 days since sending the letters. making good progress toward Wyoming. They'd just crested a rise that gave them a spectacular view of the valley below when Lucas suddenly tensed, his hand moving to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Riders coming," he said quietly. "Fast." Clara's heart began to pound as she spotted the dust cloud on the trail behind them. 5 riders, maybe 6, pushing their horses hard. Even at this distance, she could see the glint of metal badges or weapons. She couldn't tell. "It's them," she breathed. "They found us." Lucas was already scanning the terrain, his face grim. "There's a defensible spot up ahead, rocks we can take cover behind. But Clara, if it comes to shooting—" "It won't." Clara straightened in her saddle, chin lifting with determination. "I won't have bloodshed on our account." They spurred their horses to a cluster of large boulders just off the trail. Lucas dismounted quickly, helping Clara down and positioning their horses behind the rocks. He checked his rifle, then his sidearm, movements efficient and calm despite the tension. "Stay behind cover," he instructed. "Whatever happens, now Lucas Hart," the voice boomed across the distance. "We know you're up there. Come out peaceful-like." Clara recognized the voice Sheriff Thompson from Dusty Hollow. Her father had sent the law after them. "I'm not running anymore." Lucas called back. "State your business." The riders pulled up about 50 yards away, spreading out in a semicircle. Clara could see them clearly now. Sheriff Thompson, Deputy Langston Edward himself, his face a mask of controlled fury, and 3 other deputies she recognized. "You know why we're here." "Hart," the sheriff said. "You've abducted Miss Wells. Her father wants her returned immediately." "Abducted." Clara stepped out from behind the rocks before Lucas could stop her. "Sheriff Thompson, I left of my own free will." "Clara," Edward spurred his horse forward a few steps. "Thank God you're safe. Whatever this man has told you, whatever threats he's made—" "He's made no threats," Clara interrupted. "He's my husband." The words rang across the valley like a gunshot. Edward's face went white, then red. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "We're to be married. The whole town—" "I left you a letter explaining," Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm sorry, Edward. Truly I am. But I couldn't marry you when I love another." "You were confused," Edward insisted. "This criminal has filled your head with lies. Your father explained everything, how Hart threatened you years ago, how he's been planning this revenge." "Revenge?" Lucas laughed bitterly. "The only revenge here is telling the truth. Ask him. Clara, ask Deputy Langston about the night he helped run me out of town." All eyes turned to Edward, who shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You were there," Lucas continued, his voice carrying clearly. "You and another deputy, standing behind Mayor Wells while he threatened to destroy Clara if I didn't leave. Told me about that asylum in Philadelphia where wayward daughters get sent. You remember, don't you? Langston." "Is this true?" Sheriff Thompson looked between Edward and Lucas, frowning. "Deputy, did you participate in threatening this man?" Edward's jaw worked. "It was... Mayor Wells said the boy was a bad influence, said his daughter's reputation was at stake. We were just there to ensure he left peacefully." "By threatening to have me committed to an asylum," Clara's voice was ice. "By driving away the man I loved to clear the path for your courtship." The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. This was clearly not the simple retrieval he'd been led to expect. Nevertheless, Edward rallied. "You're not married, not legally. There's been no proper ceremony. Judge Morrison in Carson City would disagree," Lucas said calmly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "Marriage certificate, legal and binding. Clara is my wife. Gentlemen, you have no authority here." Let me see that." Sheriff Thompson rode forward slowly, hands visible. Lucas held out the certificate. though he kept his other hand near his weapon. The sheriff studied the document, then sighed heavily. It's legal. All right, Judge Morrison's seal and signature. He looked at Clara. Ma'am, I need to hear it from you. Did you marry this man of your own free will? I did, Clara said firmly. I love him. Sheriff, I've loved him since we were children. My father knew this and conspired to separate us. Now we're together, as we should have been 12 years ago. Your father's not going to accept this, Edward said desperately. He'll have the marriage annulled. On what grounds? Clara stepped closer to Lucas, taking his free hand. We're both of age. We entered into marriage willingly. We've consummated our union. She felt her cheeks burn, but kept her gaze steady. There are no legal grounds for annulment. The sheriff handed back the certificate. She's right. Deputy, like it or not, they're legally wed. Then we take her by force. Edward's hand moved toward his sidearm. Her father's orders. We'll make you a kidnapper and me an accessory. Sheriff Thompson interrupted sharply. Stand down. Deputy, that's an order. But... I said stand down. The sheriff's voice cracked like a whip. Mayor Wells might run Dusty Hollow, but out here, the law is what matters, and the law says a woman can choose her own husband. Edward's face twisted with rage and humiliation. You don't understand. The whole town was there. Everyone saw me waiting at the altar. Do you know what they're saying? What this has done to my reputation? That's not my concern, Clara said, though she felt a pang of genuine sympathy. Edward, you're a good man. You'll find someone who can love you properly. But that was never going to be me. Because of him. Edward glared at Lucas with pure hatred. You think you've won. Hard. You think taking her to some wilderness ranch makes up for what you are. You're still just trash. An orphan. Nobody who got lucky. She'll realize it eventually. And when she does... That's enough. Sheriff Thompson cut him off. We're done here. He touched his hat brim to Clara. Ma'am, I'll inform your father of the situation. Tell him you're legally married and left of your own accord. What he does with that information is up to him. Tell him? Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. Tell him I'm happy. Tell him I'm sorry for the scandal, but not for choosing love. And tell my mother I'll write when we're settled. The sheriff nodded, then turned his horse. Mount up, boys. We're heading back. I'm not going anywhere. Edward snarled, Not until... Deputy Langston. The sheriff's voice was steel. You'll mount up now, or you'll hand over your badge. Your choice. For a moment, Clara thought Edward might actually draw his weapon. His hand hovered near it, his face contorted with rage. Then, slowly, he backed his horse away. This isn't over, he said, looking directly at Lucas. You've humiliated me, destroyed everything I worked for. Someday, somehow, you'll pay for this. The only payment I owe is a lifetime of happiness with my wife. Lucas replied calmly, Now get off our land. Our land? Edward laughed bitterly. You're in the middle of nowhere. Exactly where we want to be. Clara said, Goodbye, Edward. I truly hope you find peace. The deputies wheeled their horses and started back down the trail. Edward lingered a moment longer, as if searching for words that would change everything. Finding none. He spurred his horse viciously and galloped after the others. Clara and Lucas stood watching until the dust cloud faded in the distance. Only when they were completely alone again did Clara realize she was trembling. You all right? Lucas pulled her into his arms. Yes, she said, though her voice shook. I didn't expect Edward. I thought it would be my father's men, not the man you jilted. Lucas stroked her hair soothingly. I'm sorry you had to face that. He helped drive you away, Clara said, anger replacing fear. He knew all these months of courtship, and he knew what they'd done. How could he stand before me and speak of love when he'd helped destroy mine? Because to men like him, love is possession, Lucas said quietly. You were a prize to be won, a way to cement his position. He never saw you. Clara, not really. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other as the adrenaline faded. Finally, Lucas pulled back slightly. We should move on. They're headed back, but your father might not accept the sheriff's report. Might send others. Where can we go that he won't follow? Lucas smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. Home. Once we cross into Wyoming, we're beyond his reach. Different territory, different laws. And I have friends there, people who'll stand with us if needed. They mounted up and continued their journey. But the encounter had changed something. The chase was real now, not just a possibility. Clara found herself looking over her shoulder, scanning the horizon for dust clouds. Talk to me, she said as they rode. Tell me about these friends in Wyoming. Lucas understood her need for distraction. He told her about Jim Sullivan, the neighboring rancher who'd helped him get established, about Dr. Martinez and his wife who ran the small clinic in town, about Reverend Collins who'd built his church with his own hands and preached to anyone who'd listen, regardless of their past. They're good people, he said. They judge a person by their actions, not their origins. You'll like them. And will they like me, the runaway bride who brought scandal to their doorstep? They'll love you, Lucas said with certainty. How could they not? As the sun climbed higher, they picked up their pace. The landscape was changing again, becoming more rugged, more beautiful. Clara began to see why Lucas loved this land. It was honest in its harshness, beautiful in its simplicity. No room for pretense or false courtesy here. I'm glad they came, she said suddenly. Lucas looked at her in surprise. The sheriff? Yes, now it's truly finished. Edward knows. My father will know. There's no ambiguity, no question about whether I was forced or confused. She straightened in her saddle. I stood before them and chose you, publicly, proudly. No regrets. Only one, Clara said, that it took 12 years and so much pain to get here. They rode on through the afternoon, two figures against the vast landscape, heading toward a future they'd build together. Behind them, Dusty Hollow and all its constraints grew more distant with each mile. Ahead lay Wyoming, and home, and a life where love mattered more than position. The sun was setting when they finally stopped for the night, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As Clara helped Lucas set up camp, she was getting better at it. More confident, she thought about Edward's parting threat. Are you worried? She asked as they sat by their fire. About what Edward said about him seeking revenge. Lucas considered this. Men like him talk big when they're hurt, but he's a creature of comfort, of society. He won't follow us into the wilderness. And if he does, he shrugged. I've faced worse than a spurned deputy with hurt pride. I hate that I hurt him, Clara admitted. Even knowing what he did, I hate being the cause of his humiliation. That's because you're a good person, Lucas said. But Clara, you can't live your life to spare others' feelings. You deserve happiness too. She leaned against him, watching the fire dance. Today had been a test, and they'd passed it. They'd faced down the past and chosen their future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were free. I love you, she said simply. And I love you, he replied. Always have, always will. The stars emerged one by one, witnesses to their triumph, somewhere far behind them. Riders were carrying news of a marriage that couldn't be undone, a choice that couldn't be unmade. But here, in the circle of firelight with wilderness all around, Clara and Lucas were just two people in love, finally free to build the life they'd dreamed of so long ago. The first glimpse of Lucas's ranch took Clara's breath away. They had crested a final ridge after a week of hard travel, and there it spread before them, a valley cradled by mountains, with a silver stream winding through grasslands that rippled like a golden sea. And there, on a gentle rise overlooking it all, stood the house Lucas had built with dreams of her in his heart. It wasn't grand by Dusty Hollow standards, no white columns or elaborate gingerbread trim, but it was solid and welcoming, with a wide porch wrapped around two sides and windows that caught the afternoon sun. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, and Clara could see curtains in the windows, unexpected touches of home. "Maria," Lucas explained, following her gaze. "I sent word ahead from Miller's station. Looks like she's been busy." As they descended into the valley, riders appeared from the direction of the barn, 3 men who clearly worked the ranch. They raised their hands in greeting, and Lucas waved back. "That's Tom Bradley, my foreman," he said, pointing to an older man with graying whiskers. "Been with me since I bought the place. The younger ones are Jake and Samuel Wilson brothers from Texas. Good hands, all of them." They met in the yard between house and barn. Tom Bradley swept off his hat, revealing a bald head bronzed by the sun. "Boss," he said with a grin. "About time you brought her home." "Tom, this is Clara, my wife," Lucas said, pride evident in his voice. "Clara, Tom here keeps this place running when I'm gone." "Ma'am." Tom's weathered face creased in a genuine smile. "We've been hearing about you for years. Glad to finally put a face to the name." "Years?" Clara looked at Lucas in surprise. "Man talks when he's been drinking," Tom said with a wink. "And the boss only ever talked about one thing when he'd had a few. Welcome home, Mrs. Hart." The Wilson brothers were shyer, barely managing to mumble greetings before finding urgent business with the horses. But their smiles were warm, and Clara felt welcomed rather than judged. "Maria's up at the house," Tom said. "Fair warning, she's been cooking for 3 days straight. Says a new bride needs a proper welcome," as if summoned by her name. A woman emerged from the house, short and rounded, with silver threading through her dark hair and a face that spoke of both strength and kindness. She hurried down the porch steps, wiping her hands on her apron. "Senor Lucas," she called. "You made it." Then her dark eyes found Clara, and her face lit up. "Oh, Senora, welcome. Welcome, come. You must be exhausted. I have hot water ready for a bath. And food, so much food." Clara found herself enveloped in a warm embrace that smelled of cinnamon and bread. Over Maria's shoulder, she saw Lucas grinning. "Maria's been with Tom since before I bought the place," he explained. "She sort of adopted me when I arrived." "Someone had to," Maria said, releasing Clara but keeping hold of her hands. "A man living alone, eating nothing but beef and beans. It was tragic." She studied Clara's face, seeming to find what she was looking for. "You'll do," she pronounced. "You have kind eyes. Now come, let me show you your home." The inside of the house was a revelation. Clara had expected bachelor quarters sparse, functional, purely practical. Instead, she found rooms that were simple but welcoming. The furniture was handmade but solid, the floors gleaming wood, and everywhere those unexpected touches, curtains at the windows, rag rugs on the floors, even pictures on the walls. "Lucas made most of the furniture himself," Maria explained as she led Clara through the rooms. "Wouldn't let anyone help. Said it had to be just right." The kitchen was exactly as Lucas had described, spacious and bright, with windows facing east and a massive stove that Maria clearly ruled. The parlor boasted the promised stone fireplace and comfortable chairs, but it was the main bedroom that made Clara's throat tight with emotion. "He finished it just last month," Maria said softly. "Said he had a feeling change was coming." The bed was beautiful, carved with wildflowers and vines, polished until it gleamed. A wardrobe stood ready for clothes she didn't yet own, and a small vanity with a mirror waited by the window. On the bedside table sat a simple glass vase with fresh wildflowers. "He picked those this morning," Maria whispered. "Rode out at dawn to that meadow where they grow thickest." Clara touched the delicate petals, blinking back tears. even believing she would never come. Lucas had prepared for her, had built her a home and kept it ready, just in case dreams could still come true. After a much-needed bath and a change into a clean dress, Maria had somehow procured my niece's. She explained, "She lives in town." Clara joined Lucas on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "It's perfect," she said simply. "It's home," Lucas replied. "Our home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade. Ranch life continued around them, the Wilson brothers moving horses to the evening pasture, Tom checking fences, Maria's husband Juan splitting wood for the stove. It was a working ranch, a living thing that required constant attention. "I want to help," Clara said. "I don't want to be just an ornament. Teach me what I need to know." Lucas smiled. "Tomorrow we'll start. Tonight, just be..." Maria called them for supper, a feast that seemed impossible from such a simple kitchen. Roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and a pie that made Lucas groan with pleasure. "She's been planning this menu for years," he told Clara. "Every time I'd come back from a trip, she'd ask if I'd found you yet. When I said no, she'd shake her head and say, 'Someday, senor. And when you do, I'll cook her a proper welcome.'" After dinner, Lucas showed her around the immediate grounds. The vegetable garden was thriving under Maria's care, neat rows of beans and squash, tomatoes heavy on the vine, herbs scenting the evening air. The chicken coop held a dozen hens and a proud rooster who eyed Clara suspiciously. "That's Napoleon," Lucas said. "Don't turn your back on him. He's got opinions about strangers." The barn was Lucas's obvious pride, clean and well organized. It held stalls for the prize horses, storage for feed and equipment, and a workshop where he repaired tack and built furniture. Clara could see the care in every detail, the love he'd poured into creating something from nothing. 500 horses?" she asked, remembering his words from that night in Dusty Hollow. "Most run free on the range," he explained. "We bring them in as needed for training, breeding, selling. The Army contracts are steady money, but the real profit is in the bloodstock. I've got 2 stallions that throw the finest colts in the territory." They walked to the paddock where one of those stallions grazed a magnificent black animal that raised his head to study them with intelligent eyes. "That's Midnight," Lucas said. "Bought him as a colt with my first profit. Everyone said I was crazy, spending so much on an unproven youngster. But I could see his potential." "Like you saw mine?" Clara asked softly. Lucas pulled her close. "You were never unproven, Clara, just waiting for your chance to shine." As they headed back to the house in the gathering darkness, a rider appeared on the valley road. Lucas tensed, his hand moving automatically to his sidearm. But Tom called out, "It's Jim Sullivan, boss, from the Double S." The rider was a large, hearty man with a booming laugh and friendly eyes. He swung down from his horse, pumping Lucas's hand enthusiastically. "Heard you brought home a bride," he said. "Had to come see for myself if the confirmed bachelor had finally been corralled." "Jim, this is Clara," Lucas said. "Clara, Jim Sullivan. He owns the spread to the north of us. Been a good friend since I arrived." "Ma'am." Jim swept off his hat. "Welcome to the valley. My wife Ellen's beside herself with excitement, finally another woman to talk to besides Maria. She'll be by tomorrow with half the county, I expect." "Half the county?" Clara asked, alarmed. Jim laughed. "Well, maybe just the nearest neighbors, but news travels fast out here. Lucas Hart getting married is bigger than Christmas and the 4th of July combined. Folks have been betting on when he'd find you for years." "Find me?" "Oh, he never said your name," Jim clarified. "But we all knew there was someone. Man doesn't build a house like this and live in it alone unless he's waiting." After Jim left with promises to bring his wife for a proper visit, Clara and Lucas retired to the parlor. Maria had lit a fire against the evening chill, and they sat before it. Clara still marveling at the reality of being here. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked. More than I ever thought possible. Clara answered honestly. But Lucas, I meant what I said earlier. I want to truly be part of this life. I want to learn to ride properly, not just side saddle. I want to understand the business, help with the books. I want to know the people, be part of the community. Then you will, he said simply. Tomorrow we'll start your education. Tom can teach you about horses better than anyone. Maria will show you how to manage a household without servants. And the neighbors, he grinned. Well, they'll teach you everything else, whether you want to learn or not. They talked until the fire burned low, planning and dreaming. Clara would need clothes suitable for ranch life. They'd need to go to town soon, meet the merchants, establish accounts. There was so much to learn, so much to do. No regrets, Lucas asked as they finally headed to bed. It had become his regular question, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was here. Only one, Clara said, stopping at the bedroom door. That I wasted so much time being afraid. If I'd been braver 12 years ago, then you wouldn't be the woman you are now, Lucas said, and I wouldn't be the man I am. Maybe we needed those years to become who we're meant to be. Clara considered this as she changed into her nightgown, a simple cotton one Maria had provided. Nothing like the silk confections in her trousseau back in Dusty Hollow. When she emerged from behind the dressing screen, Lucas was already in bed, looking oddly nervous. What is it? She asked. Just realizing, he said softly. For 12 years, I dreamed of having you here. Now you are, and I'm terrified I'll wake up and find it's still just a dream. Clara slipped into bed beside him, marveling at the comfort of the mattress, the softness of the quilts Maria had aired in the sun. This was her bed now, her home, her life. Then I'll just have to prove it's real, she said, and kissed him. Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Clara listened to the night sounds of the ranch horses nickering in the barn, an owl calling from the cottonwoods by the stream, the wind sighing through the grass, so different from the sounds of town, but already dear. Welcome home, Mrs. Hart, Lucas whispered against her hair. Home, Clara repeated, tasting the word. It had never meant much before just a house where she lived, a town where she was known. But this man beside her, this house he'd built with love, this valley that had waited for her, this was home in a way that filled her heart to bursting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be mistakes, as she learned, moments of doubt, times when her old life would seem easier than this new one. But tonight, in the bed Lucas had carved with patient hands, in the house he'd built with dreams of her return, Clara knew she was exactly where she belonged. The moon rose over the mountains, silvering the landscape beyond their window, and in the gentle darkness of their room, two hearts that had been separated for so long beat as one, finally home. 2 years had passed like a dream, each season bringing new wonders and challenges to the Hart Ranch. Clara stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The morning air carried the scent of sage and the sound of horses calling to each other across the pastures. She was different now than the woman who'd fled Dusty Hollow in her nightgown. Her hands showed the calluses of real work. Her skin was kissed by the Wyoming sun, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd found her true place in the world. The fancy dresses were long gone, replaced by practical skirts and blouses that allowed her to work alongside Lucas and the hands. Letter came yesterday, Lucas said, joining her on the porch. He held out an envelope bearing her mother's familiar handwriting. Clara took it with steady hands. The first letter from home had arrived 6 months after their flight. Her mother's words careful and formal, but carrying an undercurrent of longing. Since then, they'd corresponded regularly, slowly rebuilding a relationship fractured by Clara's dramatic departure. She opened this latest letter, scanning the contents. Edward married the Hutchinson girl from Silver Creek, she read aloud. Mother says it was a lovely ceremony, though not as grand as ours would have been. Any regrets? Lucas asked, though his smile said he already knew the answer. Only that he didn't find happiness sooner, Clara said honestly. I hope she can love him properly. The letter continued with town gossip and family news. Her father still hadn't written directly, but her mother mentioned he'd asked after Clara's health. It was progress. Slow but real. There's more, Clara said, her voice catching slightly. She says they might visit next spring, if we'd welcome them. Lucas wrapped his arm around her. It's your decision. This is your home, you decide who's welcome here. Clara leaned into his warmth, considering, 2 years ago, she couldn't have imagined facing her parents again. Now, secure in the life she'd built, the prospect seemed possible, even healing. I'll write back today, she decided. Tell her they'd be welcome. It's time. The morning routine of the ranch soon claimed their attention. Clara had indeed learned to ride properly astride like the men, in split skirts Maria had cleverly fashioned. She could rope a calf, gentle a spooked horse, and read the weather in the movement of clouds across the vast sky. Today was special. They were hosting the valley's annual harvest gathering. What had started as a simple barbecue had grown into a full celebration, with families coming from miles around. Clara had thrown herself into preparations with the same determination she brought to everything now. Mrs. Sullivan's here," called Jake Wilson from the barn. Ellen Sullivan had become Clara's dearest friend, a forthright woman who'd welcomed her without reservation. Behind her wagon came others, the Martinez family with their 5 children, Reverend Collins and his wife, the Petersons from the Eastern Valley, and more. Clara, Ellen embraced her warmly. You look radiant. Is there something you want to tell me? Clara felt her cheeks warm. She'd only told Lucas yesterday, wanting to be sure, but Ellen had sharp eyes and a mother's intuition. Not yet, Clara whispered. Soon. The day filled with laughter and community. Tables groaned under the weight of shared food. Children ran wild through the grass, and the men gathered to admire Lucas's newest colts. Clara moved through it all with quiet joy, seeing how fully she'd been accepted into this tight-knit community. Tom Bradley had set up his fiddle, and soon couples were dancing on the packed earth near the barn. Lucas claimed Clara for a waltz, holding her close as they moved to the familiar tune. Remember the first time we danced, he asked. You were teaching me in the cottonwood grove, humming because we had no music. You stepped on my feet, Clara recalled, laughing, repeatedly. I've improved some. Some, she agreed, then squeaked as he dipped her dramatically, earning applause from the onlookers. As the afternoon wore on, Clara found herself in the kitchen with the other women, listening to their talk of children and crops, recipes and remedies. 2 years ago, she would have felt out of place. Now, she contributed her own stories, her own hard-won wisdom. You've done wonders with this place, Mrs. Martinez said, gesturing around the kitchen. When Lucas lived here alone, it was like a monk's cell. Now it's a real home. He built the home, Clara said. I just helped it come alive. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, families started their journeys home. Clara and Lucas stood on the porch, waving goodbye, accepting thanks for their hospitality. The ranch felt quiet after so much activity, peaceful in the way Clara had come to love. Successful day, Lucas said, pulling her close. Very, though I think Ellen knows our secret. She has that look. What look, The one that says she's already planning to knit baby blankets. Lucas's hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach. Wonder in his eyes. They'd hoped, of course. But after 2 years, Clara had begun to worry it might not happen. When? He asked softly. Spring, Maria thinks, when the wildflowers bloom. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their reunion, their flight, their building of this life together. I have something for you, Lucas said suddenly, been waiting for the right moment. He disappeared inside, returning with a small wooden box Clara hadn't seen before. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a delicate gold locket. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny photograph, their wedding portrait, taken by a traveling photographer who'd passed through the valley last year. But opposite it was something else, a pressed cottonwood leaf, perfectly preserved. "From our tree," Lucas explained. "I went back, that first year after I left, cut this leaf and kept it, telling myself that someday I'd give it to you. Took me 14 years, but promises are promises." Clara's eyes filled with tears as he fastened the locket around her neck. The metal was warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of how far they'd come. "I love you," she said simply. "More than on our wedding day, more than yesterday, more each day we're together." Still no regrets about choosing this life. Clara gestured to the land around them, the home they'd built together, the community that had embraced them, the new life growing within her. The journey hadn't always been easy. She'd made mistakes, struggled with tasks that seemed simple to others, missed certain comforts of her old life. But she'd also discovered strength she never knew she possessed. She'd learned the satisfaction of honest work, the joy of being truly needed, the peace of living without pretense. She'd become not just Lucas's wife, but a rancher in her own right, respected for her quick mind and willing hands. "I regret nothing," she said firmly, "except perhaps not telling Napoleon the rooster who's really in charge around here. He's getting above himself again." Lucas laughed, the sound echoing across the valley. "He's met his match in you. Everything has." A wolf howled somewhere in the distant mountains, and its mate answered. The sound no longer frightened Clara as it once might have. She understood now it was just another voice in the wilderness, calling to its loved one across the darkness. "We should go in," Lucas said. "You need your rest now, for the baby." "In a moment," Clara said, not ready to leave the peace of the porch. "I want to remember this, all of it. The stars, the mountains, the way the grass smells after the sun sets, the sound of our horses settling for the night, this life we've built." Lucas sat in the porch chair, pulling her onto his lap. They sat together as the moon rose, silvering the landscape they both loved. In the barn, she could hear Tom checking the horses one last time. A light glowed in Maria and Juan's cottage, warm and welcoming. "I never stopped loving you. You know," Clara said softly, "even when I thought you were gone forever, even when I was standing in that wedding dress, about to marry another man, the love just waited, like a seed in winter soil, waiting for spring. And now it blooms," she said, touching the locket at her throat. "Every day, it blooms." They finally went inside as the air grew cool, Lucas banking the fire while Clara prepared for bed. Such simple, domestic tasks, but filled with quiet contentment. This was marriage. She'd learned not just the passionate moments, but the peaceful ones, the shared silences, the familiar routines, the knowledge that tomorrow and all the tomorrows after would be faced together. As she lay in the bed Lucas had carved with patient hands, Clara placed her hand over her stomach, marveling at the miracle growing there. A child conceived in love, who would run free across these grasslands, who would know both parents and be shaped by their courage in choosing love over convention. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, settling beside her. "About circles," Clara said. "How we've come full circle from those two children carving their initials in a tree. How our child will play in the same cottonwoods where we fell in love. How love, real love, always finds its way home. Even if it takes 12 years, Lucas agreed, kissing her gently. "Especially then," Clara whispered, "because the waiting makes the having all the sweeter." Outside, the wind sang through the grass, and the mountains stood eternal guard over the valley. Inside, two hearts that had never truly been apart beat in rhythm, cherishing the present, welcoming the future, grateful beyond words for the courage to choose love. The locket lay warm against Clara's heart, holding a photograph and a leaf, symbols of promises kept and love that endured. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, in the home built by hope and sustained by dreams, Clara Hart knew one truth above all others. She had never stopped loving him, and now she never had to. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of frontier romance. Please share in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850, hit that like button, and press the hype button to help more listeners discover these tales of courage and love in the American frontier. Until our next adventure, partners.